Hey, Walter Crosby with Helix Sales Development and another episode of Sales and Cigars. Our guest again is Nate Tutas. Nate is with me on a monthly basis. We do a series about how to think about sales. And today we get into the concept of mindset coaching. So if you're a sales manager, sales leader, CEO, getting people to change their behaviors and coach them to do different, to approach things differently. So we talk about that, but we talk about it from a perspective of why our brains do the things that we do. And we start with, what we've learned as a child, what we've learned, those experiences, how we create those patterns and those maps and where those territories go. So we get into understanding the why. Why do salespeople behave the way they do? So when we put it in the context of the sales role, and we put it in the context of what we call sales DNA, the six findings that we use in Objective Management Group, someone's need for approval that can get in the way of a salesperson being effective. Their ability to discuss money can get in the way of a salesperson being effective. How they buy things, their supportive buy cycle can get in the way. So we talk about those things, and we're trying to help people understand these are the things that are going on in the brain. This is how these connections are made. We're not getting into like medical school stuff, but we're trying to keep it a high level and understand why the salespeople are here. And just recognizing that we have these behaviors and we have these thoughts that are subconscious, and we've had them forever. We talk about our kids when they were 2 years old and what they've picked up. They're great examples to help us understand as an adult. Sometimes I refer to it as baggage sometimes because I'm looking at it from the negative perspective. And there's that old Mark Twain quote about it's not about if you have baggage, it's how much baggage you have and how many valets you need to get it to the curb. So we talk about this, and then we're going to probably do a series on how we can affect that change, and as a sales manager, what we can do that are tactical that will help the salespeople improve on performance. So go grab a cigar, grab a cocktail, strap in for another episode of Sales and Cigars. Thanks. So Nate, we're at another episode of How to Think About Sales. Welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.
These are becoming popular. Even my producer was telling me that he says, you and Nate can geek out a little bit on sales, but you relate it so that even somebody who's not considers himself a salesperson, he gets it and sees the value of it. So I think we're doing something that's of value, and I appreciate you participating.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, that was when we first started off, that was the whole thing, is how do we just add as much value as we can with sharing kind of the sessions where we geek out about different stuff. So it's cool that people appreciate that.
So today, I think the topic that I'd like to explore is sales culture. And I'll kind of tee it up this way. Sales culture is a little different than company culture. They need to be congruent. But I believe that sales culture has to have certain elements to it that really drive performance. Because that's what a culture needs to be in a sales organization. You need accountability. You need that high performance mindset. You need the idea that we're always trying to learn, sharpen our saw, right? However you want to position that. So there should always be that element of like, how do we get better? What are we learning in the market? And I love a lot of competition within the organization, But I also love it to see like that there's that competitive nature, but also that desire by the team to help each other. Right? There's a balance there of those scales, right? Mm-hmm. Where you're trying to beat the other person, right? That there's nothing wrong with that. Do it the right way, but also when that person's struggling, you pat them on the back, you give them a tip, whatever that might look. So, would you have a different spin on that? Would you add something? What did I miss? If that was how we were defining culture.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's important with culture is kind of how the leader sets out what their expectations are of behavior, right? So how is one expected to behave within a certain team? And that's kind of what you're alluding to, I think, as far as, we compete with each other, but it's in good jest. It's an internal competition, but it's kind of similar to like siblings of I can compete with my brother, but you try to pick on him and, good luck because I'm going to step in to defend him type thing. Same thing. I had that in the military where we would compete with each other internally, but we always knew that the enemy was out there. So our competition together was iron sharpens iron. Let's use our skill set to make each other better so that when we go out and face the world, we're that much better. We're that much more indestructible, so to speak. So I think a lot of times, though, if you were to get down to saying to a salesperson, what is your role? What's actually expected of you? What's expected of you from a performance perspective? What's expected of you from a behavior perspective? And then look back at how well did that actually align with the job description when you first got hired? You'd have like maybe 2 out of 10 things that might actually line up. And everybody would probably give you a different answer. So
it's sort of like give me your 30-second commercial and your value statement, and they're all wildly different, and for the same reason. And my opinion is that comes from leadership, right? You have leadership of the department, the sales leader, whatever that person's, a manager, director, VP, CRO, but also chief executive officer, the chief effectiveness officer, right? President, whatever title he or she has. They have to be able to make sure that sales organization has their strategy understood. They understand the brand. They understand what the company's trying to do, how they want to treat their customers, right? That comes from both the chief executive officer and the chief sales officer. They have to be able to make those expectations clear, and they have to be able to articulate that in a way that everybody understands, and they have to articulate it over and over and over, right? It's just not a one and done situation. So like when we do an SCIA for a team, where we're looking at the effectiveness and analyzing how well they can improve, there's one slide in that deck that talks about, did the company think you were a performer? Did you think you were a performer, right? And are you a performer or you're not a performer based on certain numbers? And I cannot remember the last time I saw one of those where everybody was aligned. Right, where everybody was 100% in the one box of I know I'm performing, and I know that and the company believes that they were performing, or that they were all aligned in that I know I'm not performing, and the company agrees with that, which is even more rare, right? Because somebody has to admit that they're not being successful. So. I mean, we've read some of the same books, mostly because you're like, hey, you should read this book. And I've reread some books. So, I think we should be able to talk about, or we should talk about culture in the context of dysfunction and what's missing. But I really like what you said about setting those expectations and making it clear about what's acceptable behavior and what isn't. So since you brought it up, why don't you expound on that a little?
Yeah, well, I think, one thing that's interesting, and you and I both get the opportunity to interact with both sales leaders, VPs of sales, CROs, sales managers that are in different roles. And we also get the opportunity to interact with the CEO or the president of a company. And one thing that has always been interesting to me is how many times those two individuals, when you actually get down to brass tacks of what's your vision of, like, chief executive officer, what's your vision of how you want your company portrayed in the market when the sales team goes to market and approaches your customers? How do you see that? What should that look like? Blah, blah, blah. And then having that same conversation with the sales leader, and they're not always on the same page. Sometimes you have a sales leader that's very ambitious and wants a certain way of selling and wants to see all that. But when you go back to the CEO or the president, they're not aligned. That drive isn't necessarily there. They want the revenue, but when you actually have the conversation to say, okay, well, what's it actually going to take to get you there? What changes need to take place within the team? What performance standards need to be in place? If people aren't meeting those performance standards, what needs to take place? And what does that mean from a overall company perspective? You don't always have that there. So the change management component to reach some of those things when there is alignment is different. And I think the other thing is, just from a pure communication standpoint, we all tend to be fairly ambiguous with our language. I've got a company I know of where they've said many times that they want to have, one of the best sales forces out there. And I've had the opportunity to talk to the company president, and I've said, that's amazing. How would you define that? What would that look like? And they go, well, I don't know. It's like, well, if you're using the phrase, the specific phrase that they had used was they want a sales force that's best in class. If you're using the phrase, I want something that's best in class, but you can't describe it, well, just think of the automobile industry, right? Best in class to me could be an Aston Martin, or it could be a Ford Raptor. It depends on what our end goal is and what we're actually trying to accomplish, right?
Well, what's the class? What's the segment? What are we comparing ourselves to? What's the measurement of success? I want to go back to something that you said a minute ago. Like, if you were sitting in a room with the chief salesperson and the chief executive officer and operations director and chief marketing officer, and you got those folks sitting in the same room, like, all right, guys, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to write down the answer to the question, no more than 2 sentences, on a piece of paper, and then we're going to share that after you get it written down. You're going to have a couple minutes to do it. So what's the question that one would ask that group of people to see if there's alignment with the leadership, not in their departments? I think that's the second question. But the first question is, what is it we're trying to represent? What's our goal as a company and a brand? What would you think? Think about that for a second. What would be that question, or what would be a good question to start there?
I think you could probably just start off with and this is kind of a two-parter, but what's your vision for the company? And when people think about your organization, what do you want people to say about your organization? What would that vision be, and how would you see that executed?
So the rocking chair test.
Yeah, a little bit. Kind of like the rocking chair test of, if you were 90 and you were looking back, what would that be? But almost even like in the moment, what do you want that to be? How do you want to be seen in the market? If you want to be the best in class sales team and you haven't even defined that, how do you even get there? And how do you expect anybody on the team to have any alignment around that whatsoever, and what that takes? So to steal from one of the books that we've both read, but one of the Patrick Lencioni books, like, what's our purpose? Why are we even here? Like, why does the company exist?
Well, I think that's a specific question. But what's the vision? Right? Because we talk about visionaries. I do a lot of work with an organization where there's a visionary and an integrator, and that visionary is out there, right? They got these ideas that pop in their head, and one of the ones I was at an event this morning, and one of the visionaries is like, I'm the visionary, and he's the integrator. I'm the guy that comes in and screws everything up, and he's the guy that kind of puts it back together. And I thought, like, wow, that's an interesting way to look at it, because it's not 100% sarcasm there. There's some truth to it, where he like comes in and just like throws a wrench in the system, but in the core, there's something there that's like, all right, what's he really trying to get to? What's he really thinking about, right? And then if you can be patient enough to dig around into that through the chaos, there's that vision that they have. But I find that they could paint a vision of what they want in 5 to 10 years, right? Like how many they want to serve 1,000 companies, and they want to be able to help take care of the community, and they want to offer some balance for their employees, right? And give them a opportunity to make a real living, all those things. But they have trouble articulating what the expectations are for the individual. And I think that's why sales culture, company culture fails, is that the leader comes out, says once, maybe twice, all of this vague language. We want to be best in class. We want to be a leader. We want to be champions of the West, right? Whatever that is. But they don't connect the dot for the employee, for the individual, to be able to say, all right, I'm in. Let's do that. But they don't help that person see what can I do every day that helps us get there, right? And it requires more work. It requires more conversations by that leader to dig into the division leaders, the department leaders, for them to show up in meetings to say, remember what I said, we want to be best in class. Okay, so what that means to the sales group is A, B, and C. And that's what doesn't happen. And that's why you don't get buy-in as much as you get, like, yeah, rah, 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 so what? Now you got to go out in the field and do the work. I don't know what I need to do every day to make that work, right? They don't connect it. That's what I see as being the big problem in the culture.
Yep. No, I would completely agree with that. Because there's so many different instances, and I think one of the things that's really important is having that North Star that even the visionary has to kind of abide by to a certain extent. Of this is our reason for existence, and every company has a reason for existence. Membrane, like if we think about like Membrane, our reason for existence is to elevate the sales profession. So that's our North Star. Any idea that anybody comes out with, we can immediately put through a filter and say, okay, how does that help us to elevate the sales profession? And every single thing that we go through in the company, we can go back to, how does that actually help us to elevate the sales profession? Other companies you have are employee owned, and their purpose is not necessarily to make a massive profit. It's to support the lives and the families of the employees that they have. So their purpose is completely different. And many times we don't look into what's the actual purpose that we're here for, right? Even getting that to have that North Star that you can go back and filter things down through needs to be communicated all the way up and down the chain.
It needs to be clear, talked about consistently, talked about a lot. And then I think I like the idea of North Star. I heard that this morning at the event I was at. They used that term, like the North Star. Why are we here? And it's an exercise that they actually work through. And I think it's meaningful, but I think if you don't take it to the next level and the next level after that and the next level after that. Because that guy on the loading dock has to be able to feel connected to that vision. Otherwise, he or she isn't going to be able to feel that same camaraderie and collaboration and connection to the culture. I told a story on a previous podcast where I was working at a manufacturing company, sales role, and the guy on the dock, on the shipping dock, was responsible for stuff coming in and out, packaging up, and sending it out. He made the executive decision that there were 40 boxes going out to the company for a job that had a deadline. They needed it for this date. And he decided to pull one of the boxes because it was damaged. And when he looked at it, he could see that the equipment inside was jacked up. So instead of holding all 40 boxes, he shipped 39 and held the one. Got it connected, went back, got it. They fixed the ones that were damaged. And what he did is he called me and said, "Hey, here's what I did." And I'm like, what? You did what? And he's like, "Yeah, I just didn't figure that it was good to send it out because they were going to come back and they were going to be upset about it. And we'd have to go send a replacement. So I just pulled it. And then, you can either go deliver it or I can overnight it or we have options." So I remember I called the customer and I said, "Look, hey," and they knew the guy because they would come pick stuff up. I said, "Gary pulled the package," and told them the story. And they're like, "Are you serious?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "He did that to help make sure that there wasn't a problem, that we didn't see that in the last minute." I'm like, "That's exactly what he was thinking. If you didn't see the damaged box, you open it up, it's the last day, you got to get it done, and poof, it's broken." I said, "I'll have you the new box tomorrow, and you don't need all of them to start the job anyway." But he did that on his own because he understood that we try to help the customer. Our differentiator with the customer wasn't price, it wasn't better product, it was, we're going to make your job of delivering the product on time what we do. And he that decision did that. And this is a guy, it's an important job. He wasn't making, $1 million. But that customer came in a couple of weeks later, boxed the swag of their stuff, gave it to him and said, "Hey, we know what you did. Appreciate it. The job went well, blah, 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 blah." And then they come and found me and they're like, "We need to go talk to the boss man." I marched them over to the corner office and they told him, he was happy as he got. But my point is that had a ripple effect, and that customer, we had the benefit of the doubt. They were a great customer for a very long time because if somebody understood what the differentiator was at its job function. So it's a long story. Sorry. But I think that's the piece that's usually missing. And in the sales organization, you still need that North Star, best in class, what our expectations are. Like, we don't want to hit our numbers. We want to, as a team, blow our number up. Sometimes Nate's going to kill it. Sometimes Walter's going to kill it. But we're going to be there to help each other out and win as a team. Celebrate those wins. And so it's communication and articulation on a consistent basis of what those goals and expectations are, and fighting through all the dysfunction and pettiness and childishness and drama and whatnot.
Yep. And I think part of that conversation around expectations, I think, is also, what's the expectation from a behavioral perspective, And then what's the expectation if the behaviors that we follow don't produce the results that we actually want? So
explain behavioral. What do you mean by behavior?
So behavioral, you could get really deep on behavioral just as far as how you interact with customers, how you respond to customers, things like that. But from a selling context, we're talking basics of, what are the leading indicators that'll create the lagging indicator of the revenue metric that you're looking for. So what are we expecting from the level of pipeline that's in someone's pipeline at a given time? What are we expecting from the win rate that they should be maintaining or increasing depending on what their goals are? What are we expecting from an average deal size? Those kinds of things. You start getting into that and the behaviors that we expect for aligning with our ICP. We expect that if the customer doesn't fit well within our ideal client profile and you're going to bring them into the pipeline, that there's some level of justification that you're going to come back and say, hey, I know this one really shouldn't be in there, but here's the reason that I brought him in. I feel like it could be a really good opportunity. It's outside our norm, but et cetera.
But you have a reason.
You have a reason.
You've thought through,
yep.
And it may be acceptable, maybe not, but it's like, all right, let's give it some runway.
Yep.
Right? The leader might say, the manager might say, let's give it some runway. But if we're not making progress, you got a short runway, right?
Right. And the thing is, if I as a salesperson know that that's what's expected of me, if I'm below that, because sometimes the expectation is, well, you should just be closing sales. So I've had conversations with salespeople where they've been like, well, I closed 10 sales this month. Billy only closed 3, but I'm the one getting yelled at. I don't get it. And it's like, well, let's look at the numbers. You're closing an average deal value of $500, and Billy over there is closing an average deal value of 10 grand. His 3 out trumps your 10 all day, every day. And they're going, well, nobody ever told me that that's what I should be paying attention to. I was just looking at number of sales, not total sales volume,
Yeah, that's that old adage of you can't get mad at somebody for doing something you didn't tell them that they couldn't do.
Exactly. But then I think the other thing, and this is where I think a lot of leaders are hesitant to go there, but from an accountability perspective, I think the other conversation needs to be of this is what we expect expectations-wise, behavioral-wise of where we're going. Here's what happens if we're successful. That's the commission conversation. That's the bonus conversation that we're always happy to have. But what's the conversation around if we're not meeting that? Right? So what happens if
the ugly truth?
Yeah.
That everybody's trying to hide?
Yeah.
Conflict?
But the thing is, that should never be a surprise to an employee. That should never be a surprise to a salesperson. It should be that they know what happens with success. That's the reward side of it. And they know what happens if there's failure for whatever reason. And hopefully that also spurs them on to say, you know what, I'm getting close to that. I don't want to be there. I'm going to raise my hand and say, hey, can you help me? Because I don't want that to happen. But if you never have that conversation to begin with, when all of a sudden you go to them and you say, hey, you're underperforming, they're going, underperforming to what?
Right.
So.
And it's a really important point that if you don't set the expectation of what's acceptable and what's not, it's just like children, right? If you don't teach the child that you don't run through the house with like a crazy person when we have guests over, or that you sit down at dinner and you have dinner as a family, right? Or no screens at the table, whatever the situation is, it's not the kid's fault that they act like a knucklehead. It's the parents' fault because they haven't been taught, trained, supported, provided the guidance. Ultimately the kid is the one who suffers the consequences. So with it's the same thing with a sales leader. This is the good, and if we go over this way, this is bad, this is unacceptable. But when we're in here, if you see that, I'm going to tell you, but if you see it struggling, you have the right, the obligation to raise your hand and say, I'm struggling, I'm not sure, I need a little help. And my personal guidance to that sales leader is you do what you can to help the person support the person that's raised their hand, because that takes a ton of courage to say, I'm screwing it up. It's not working. What do I need to do? And I think those are the people that you really should spend the extra time with to determine if they're really capable of doing the role. And if they're not, then everybody wins by them moving someplace else. But you got to give them the fighting chance, right? If they've asked for help. You're a sales manager. Did you ever experience that?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly experienced that. And the interesting thing I had for me is I was in a very unique position where when I got put into sales management, no one had sat down with the team for a long time and helped to connect the goals to what they wanted personally and all that kind of stuff. So I got a lot of response from my team just from doing that and caring about the team and letting them know, here's what the expectations are. You know, on the positive end, here's what the expectations are. If things start to go, you know, a little below the metrics that we're looking for, here's how we'll handle that. Here's how we'll manage it. Here's how we'll work through it. But I also encourage my team to hold each other accountable and say, hey, if you're working with another salesperson, you see that they're not putting in the effort, you should be calling them out on that, because we're a team working towards a collective objective, and it's going to take every single one of us working together to achieve that. So that was something that I also communicated and tried to encourage with my team as much as possible as well.
So when you were managing a sales team, did you have individual goals and team goals? Were the team goals beyond revenue? So share with the audience, please, an example of a non-revenue metric for a team that would be reasonable and achievable for a typical sales organization.
Well, so for us, we were in a distribution space. So we had various different manufacturers whose lines we repped, and those manufacturers all wanted a piece of the pie, right? So we would have conversations internally from a leadership team perspective to say, who is it that we're really aligned with? Who are we trying to grow with? And part of the team objective was, we have a certain manufacturer that we want to grow X amount of revenue, but we have so many units that we want to move based on either spiffs and bonuses that they were pushing back to the company, or just based on, we had a strategic relationship there that we were looking to reinforce. And so we would look at not only the revenue objective of the individual sales rep, but then we also look collectively as a team, how do we really leverage that with our best partners so that those partners see us in a better light, and then we get better things the following year. So and we also communicated that to the team, so the team understood we weren't just pushing a specific manufacturer with no real rhyme or reason, or because they came and said, hey, if you sell X amount of units, we're going to, give you a trip or something. We were doing that because strategically we had looked at it as a company and said, we want to go in this specific direction. And if the whole team pulls together, our sales could come from all over the place, but there was a specific focus there that the team was going to have a collective goal that also helped the team internally to learn a lot, because they were saying, hey, I know you were selling that unit over there at that place. What was their feedback? How did that work? What pushback did you get? How'd you work around that? And so you had a lot of collective unity around that as well.
But it's because the communication was thorough, and the why behind, like, all right, we want to line up with this group because we think their flexibility in shipping, their flexibility in manufacturing, their product line is diverse, whatever the reasons were that the executive team came up with. You go back, like, it's not just, the CEO's not getting a jet or being flown around. It's like, we're all going to win because we're going to get better pricing that will be able to help, add to margin, and you guys are compensated on margin. So boom, again, we all win. But it's that thoroughness of the conversation. So before we wrap up, I had a situation a few months ago where distributor, they compensated their salespeople, right? The company compensated their employees, commissions and bonuses. But the distributor gave the employees spiffs that were sizable, 5 figures, to do certain things that may or may not have supported the strategic objectives of the company. As a distributor, did you ever encounter that where they were writing checks to the salespeople as the company that manufactured the products?
Yeah.
You ever seen that?
Yep. Yeah, that happens all the time in distribution because the manufacturers are looking for ways to incentivize the reps to go out there and push their line as much as possible. And that also comes back to making sure that you're actually communicating all the way up the chain of command and all the way down the chain of command from a strategic perspective. And we had that happen a couple of times. And what that really boiled down to is I made sure that the distributor or the manufacturers, if they wanted to present an idea like that they would come through me first so that I understood at least what the incentive was for my team. And then we would talk as a leadership team to say, how does this align with our overall objective? And is this something that we want to push out to our team? And if it was, we would happily push it. And if it wasn't, we would respectfully ask them and just say, hey, we appreciate that, but here's what we're currently working on. And if you do that, that's really going to hamper the relationship we have because it's going to take us off our strategic alignment. And, we'd kind of say, basically, can we push that off a quarter or push that off a couple for whatever reason?
But it goes back to leadership, whatever level, is having an uncomfortable conversation with somebody, right? And that's sales manager, sales director, being able to go to that distributor and say, look, we understand you want to move that product. That's cool. And we're not going to tell them not to, but it doesn't line up with what we're really trying to do. So it's that isn't what was occurring. They just allowed the reps to basically cut their own deal and even $25,000 extra. They sold that thing, and that's a tough thing to put at the feet of an individual to make the right choice for the customer. Because to me, that's where I was coming from. Is that what the customer really needs? Yeah, they might never know, but is that the right thing to do? To give that individual that much authority when it might not be?
Well, the other thing that you have there, because I remember this happening at one point, and we brought the manufacturer rep in. He kind of shared the program that they had and what he wanted to present and everything, and we said, okay, so let's look at that from our strategic point of view right now. And as it stands, we didn't have the inventory to support what he was looking to do. So the sales numbers that he was looking to hit based on his territory and his plan that they had created back at HQ, pretty much, I don't know if it was actually at HQ for the manufacturer, but what they had created from the manufacturing side, and they were bringing to us, and we looked at it and said, okay, so here's what that's going to mean for us operationally, right? We're going to have to increase the amount of inventory that we have on hand. We're going to have to do this. We're going to have to do this. We're going to have to do this just to meet the orders that our sales team could potentially place if they do what you're asking them to do. What would be a lot more effective is if we started seeding the market now and creating an awareness within the customer base around that. And we'd be happy to do that. We'd be happy to coordinate from a marketing perspective so that we're increasing awareness around that. That'll give us the time to get feedback from the market and figure out if that's something that we want to bring in stock, bring in inventory, et cetera. And we worked through the whole thing, and it ended up being where it was a win-win based on actually delaying it, which they weren't really happy about initially, but they saw that had we done it the way they wanted, just kind of helter-skelter, to your point, the customer wouldn't have been satisfied. Our internal team would have been pulling their hair out going, we don't have the inventory. Like now we have a bunch of backlog, this, that, and the other. And the salesperson's going, well, why am I not getting paid? Well, you're not getting paid because you don't get paid until we deliver the product and we get paid. And, you go through the whole thing. And all that needs to be coordinated. And a lot of times that isn't always as well thought out as it should be, I guess you could say.
And to me, that goes back to what we said at the beginning. It's the leadership. It's the leaders defining the strategy, defining what it's going to be, and then breaking that down, and then having that be, all right, there's the North Star. That's what we're looking. That's where we're headed. Does this get us there? Yes or no? Maybe. Well, maybe's not the right answer. Let's dig into it, right? But that's something that has to be, that's got to come from the top. You can't expect your people just to go figure that out. And I think that, you know, I think that's something that I talk about it with clients that, you know, look, the outlook of the team, you got 8 people on the team and all of their outlooks suck, right? Because we measure outlook on their evaluation. What does it tell you? Well, they're upset about something. Okay, what do you think they might be concerned about? You might be confused, upset. You might not be clear about what they're doing. Okay, well, what is that? So, I mean, we could guess. Perhaps we have the manager have a conversation about what seems like you might be confused about this, and when we go over the data, we pull that out, and it's to me, it's illuminating how disconnected a leader is from the team, and it usually just has to do with the words not being clear. Everybody wants to do it. Yeah, we're a team player, but they don't know what to do to make it work. I think that's a good place to land. What would you want to add before we sign off on this?
I think the only thing that I would add is it's important to determine what that is right at the beginning so that even during the hiring process, that's being communicated to whoever it is that you're hiring. Hey, you know, you're coming into a great team. I want you to know this is how this team functions. This is how we act. This is what's expected. This is what happens when things don't go as expected. This is how we work together. This is how we challenge each other. This is how we compete. This is, you know, communicate all of that and let the person know that culturally they need to fit that culture, because if they don't, they may not really enjoy their job all that well. And a lot of times I think we just like to ignore that and hire people. And then when we get them in, we're like, we don't know why it's not a good fit. And it's like, well, how much did you actually explain some of that information up front? Is that there, you know, whose fault is that?
Just telling a salesperson that we're going to hold you accountable to metrics, and the accountability looks like this. We're going to go through these process. We're going to make it clear, and we're going to, you know, just telling somebody that, it's like, if you're a performer, like, all right, well, tell me about typical metrics. Tell me about, you know, to make sure that things are realistic based on your experience. But some people are going to be like, holy crap, they're going to actually make me want to do the things that they want me to do. And frankly, I would rather find that out before we make a hiring mistake. Because I always tell a candidate, look, you have a decision to make that's just as important as the decision we have to make to whether or not to bring you on. They're equally important. And we want you to have full information and transparency around these things. So just having that kind of a conversation about here's what everything looks like under the covers, I think is another thing that people miss. That's a good add to that. We could probably come up with 4 or 5 other things. But I think one more thing, and I think about it, that North Star can't keep moving. It's got to be there, and we can iterate. We can say, look, this is what the market's telling us. This is what you're giving us feedback. This is what we're hearing. So we think we need to have to adjust our path, or our strategy is the same to get to the North Star, but our tactics are going to have to be tweaked just a bit. And we're not changing, but when people come in like, oh, the role titles are going to change, and they see all these capricious things that are done that don't really mean anything. Like, oh, we got a new CRM, we got a new this, we got a new that, and it doesn't work. So the last thing I'd like to add is that, you know, when we're talking about those performance ideas, and we're talking about you know, win rates and deal sizes and those key performance indicators, you know, using membrane, right? Talk about memory just for a second. Being able to show that to a candidate not the details of the data, but to be able to say, this is what you'll know where you stand. We're not hiding anything. It's all right there for you to go look at it on a weekly basis if you want. I think, that's one of the, like, a shout out to Membrane for that ability for everybody to be aware, and it makes it easier for leadership, makes it easier for managers to illustrate, check, verify, make sure that they're being effective. I think that's just something that we should add to this, because Membrane's paying you. They're a valued partner to Helix, because it's the best freaking product on the market, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, yeah, you're not going to get any argument from me there. But I think one of the main things is, and I've gotten on this soapbox previously, I know, but just on that point, one thing that I've always believed from my time in the Marine Corps and then going out into the civilian world and seeing how people recruit and do all that kind of stuff, and you and I have had this conversation before, but when you get recruited, especially by the Marines, one of their core messages that attracts people to the Marine Corps is they say, listen, we have a 13-week process that we've proven over hundreds of years of turning civilians, and however you want to describe yourself, which we don't do in the most pleasant of manner, as you can imagine. And in 13 weeks, we forge you into a Marine. You earn that title, and at the end of it, you come out a United States Marine, something that no one can ever take away from you, blah, 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 blah. And one thing I've always failed to understand is how companies don't take their ability to hire someone, train them into someone who's wanted by the market, who's desired by the market, because they upskilled them in how they actually work with them and how they onboard them and how they train them and how they help them to understand the business side of things and how to pull the levers that actually increase revenue and how to pull the levers that increase their sales and all those kinds of things. And then show them that in a way that says, so when you come on board, other companies may have better health benefits. Other companies may be offering you a better salary. But what I can't guarantee is that they can offer you a path that we have, and here it all is. And Membrane's a tool that actually can help you to put that in there and show them, here's how we help you go, pardon the phrase, but here's how we help you go from zero to hero and really transform in a way to being that.
Go from a dumbass civilian to a Marine and dress blues with a sword.
Pretty much. So.
Well, I think that my not so humble opinion is companies look at that as a zero-sum game, and if they're not playing the long game. We go out and train somebody to do a really good job, and we make them happy. Yeah, there's a chance you might lose them. There's a bigger chance that they don't want to go because they talk to their competitors, and you guys get what? And you're making what? I mean, those are they don't have confidence in their process, and they don't have the mindset that, to me, it's like, if I can get a salesperson to grow where somebody else is constantly calling them, about recruiting them, I'll have that conversation with them. Right? I mean, I don't want to lose you, man, but let's talk about what it is that they're really offering you and make sure that the grass is really greener and it's not just full of a bunch of, cow shit or horse shit, right? You're going to keep stepping in. Make sure that what you have is over there. And if it's better, then maybe we should go learn something.
Yeah, and I'd be following that same pattern of saying, hey, they may be offering you more money, they may be offering you a better health package. Let's talk about the other things that they need to have. How is their executive leadership communication? How are they communicating to you what your goals and objectives are going to be? And the interesting thing, because I've had this conversation when I was a manager, my whole thing was I was like, listen, I want you to be the best possible salesperson, employee, whatever that you can possibly be, and I want to help you to get there. And I expect that there's going to be a point where other companies are going to come and want to poach you away from us. That shows me that I'm doing the right thing because I'm getting you to that point. Well, I would say I have no issue with that. The only thing I ask is come to me so that I can help you to figure out, is that the right move for you? And if it is, you'll have my blessing, and I'll say, please, they offered you something better than we can offer. Go for it. I'm glad that you get a step up. And that builds loyalty from a sales rep who goes, okay, you're there for my best interest.
It has to be authentic and sincere.
Certainly.
Right?
Yep.
That's not always the case, but I just think doing the right thing on a regular basis yields the right outcomes on a regular basis. So, all right, Nate. Again, thank you. Another great, interesting conversation. I've just been thinking a lot about culture, and that's what I wanted to talk about today. That I think if we can get that to be better, other things come easier. Not easy, easier. Hard things are. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Sales and Cigars with Walter Crosby of Helix Sales Development. For more on sales and cigars, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Sales and Cigars, produced by thepodcastproshop.com.